The marriage or knowing you or
The marriage.
meeting you.
How was the first year of being married for you?
Uh, yeah, it was tough. It was a lot of grinding against, rough edges and getting to know each other
Was I easy to live with?
and no. In fact, I remember ready to ship you back to West Virginia a couple times.
Can you believe we're doing this?
No, not really.
Would you have ever imagined 20 years ago that we'd be sitting here doing a podcast?
Not a chance.
No.
No.
So we've been married 20 years.
20? Yeah.
Almost 21.
Right. Yeah.
How'd this start for you?
Uh, Start the marriage or knowing you or
The marriage.
meeting you.
How was the first year of being married for you?
Uh, yeah, it was tough. It was a lot of grinding against, rough edges and getting to know each other
Was I easy to live with?
and no. In fact, I remember ready to ship you back to West Virginia a couple times.
Yeah, I was not an easy person to live with, that's for sure.
But was I easy?
No, but I think in not not extreme ways. Like I wasn't easy. It was a tough year, no. And I think it's crazy because when you're married, you just experience life in such a different way that you've never experienced life. Here, how old was I when we got married? I was 22. So I lived 22 years and I had just never lived life like I had when we got married because I had had close friends. In university, I lived in a very close community. But being married to someone, being one to someone, there are just things that confront you in life,
Mm.
like your own faults, your own errors, your own patterns of thinking that you have never been confronted with ever in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think on so many levels, jumping into marriage is a shock.
Yeah.
And, being early 20s, you're still kind of a baby in many ways, and you
Yeah.
think you've lived, maybe some people have lived more life than we had, you know what I mean? But you think you know so much, and, from teenager to whatever, it's like you've got it all covered. You know what you're doing, but you really have no idea. You really don't know the person you're marrying. You know what I mean? So that first year, yeah, I mean, it was a challenge on many levels. I think for me,
Mm-hmm.
I went from like having zero responsibility, being a young teenager, really had no rules, and just kind of stumbled my way through life, and then became a Christian, at 20ish years old. So even when we got
Mm.
married, it's like I was starting my career, but there was just very little responsibility for me. So that was a big shock among many other shocks. I think the responsibility aspect for me was a big shock.
And I think too, for me, and this goes to our different personalities, I remember the first year, just this pressure that we needed to act and feel like we were in the honeymoon stage. You know what I mean? Like I remember we'd go hang out with people or go to church and be like, so how was it being married? And my personality wanting to cover, wanting to pretend, make sure everyone thinks it looks, good. I just remember the pressure of just like, oh, it's amazing, but it was not amazing. And you have a completely different personality. You would not pretend. And so you couldn't cover up what was happening. But I just remember the pressure of we need it at least to look like what it's supposed to look like.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I guess so. And again, there's so many things that you really can't even begin to visualize or understand until you're past that threshold and you're in marriage. Before you've got hearts in your eyes and you're
Yeah.
in la la land and just kind of thinking and feeling whatever, this elevated level of emotions, and then reality kind of hits, responsibility and
Yeah.
having to answer to someone else or
Be accountable.
be accountable.
Definitely. So now it's almost 21 years later, and we've had 3 kids. They're all basically in the teenage years. So why are we sitting here now doing Unmasked and Messy?
I think we've walked an extraordinary road, as you know, since you've been front row seat to all of that stuff. And I think that unmasked, messy, I think it's the reality of what we experience as humans.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's this facade that we often maintain or feel like we have to, put up. And, maybe that's with you, like with people at church, or making it life seem like something like it was a certain way to certain people. But I think that it goes very, very more deeper in many different ways.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In terms of who we are, identity, the things that we long for. And so I just think that, there's a story to tell as we've discovered, kind of peeled back the layers of who we are and realize that, whether it's life in the business world, in church, family and friends, there's this aspect of kind of, wearing a mask or pretending. And then there are even things that we don't even see about ourselves. And so I think that there needs to be this like unmasking personally and in the interior of who we are to begin to realize what is it that is driving us or motivates us or causes us to say these things or act in these certain patterns. You know what I mean? And so it's been a discovery for us.
Yeah.
And I think we've realized being in the world of ministry or in a world where there's like a public, part of our lives, that pretending and performing and this masked existence is really common. You know what I mean? And it's a barrier.
Yeah.
It's a barrier for growth.
Yeah. And I think looking back, so we lived 10 years in California. Living the American dream. No, we live the American dream. And all of our kids were born there. And we had a traumatic experience happen. And then we moved here to Spain almost 11 years ago. And I think in my life personally, when we moved to Spain, everything was chaotic in us. And I don't even know if we realized then, but we were just barely holding on. And I can speak for myself. I could not say, I'm losing it. Like, there was just no way. First of all, because we came here to do ministry, right? So there's no way that the people who's here to do ministry can be losing it. But it's like even to acknowledge it in myself that I am not okay. Like, this is not okay. And little by little, I think God has allowed us to see, first of all, that we're not okay. And second of all, that it is good to be honest about that. And in that, He begins to work and to free us and to heal us.
Yeah, I think that so much of like what should be a goal of our lives is growth and individual progress and maturity. But I think there should be a growth and maturity in how we handle relationships, And I think that the things that we're talking about, the not being able to be honest, being masked, or not to be able to admit certain things, it's such a blockade for that, like I said before. But really, I think the purpose of wanting to share our story, I guess in my mind at the moment, is there are different like seasons of life.
Yeah.
And somehow you're just like on this train, like you can't get off.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you're moving in a direction and you're just not permitted to step off and say, hold on, wait a minute. I need to take a breather. I need to take a rest, or to even breathe and say, hey, why am I feeling this way? What's going on with me? Like you said, am I okay? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so I think my desire as a pastor is to want to help people, but that has to, I think, to some degree, start here and how I connect with God and how I can connect to the Bible and know the truth and know myself too. But I think we want to help. I think, there's pain that you go through. And I think some things you can only learn when you're going through pain or through the desert, certain lessons. But I think, being able to help people to understand those different seasons of life and the way they all kind of come crashing together, the way they're all strung together, and to be able to navigate who you are as a person, as a believer, as a husband, as a wife, as a father. It's hard, you know what I mean? And it's hard to keep going. And, I think we should want to preserve our relationships. And so it becomes really hard to do that and to grow and to progress when you're just blind, because we all have blind spots.
Yeah.
When you're just blind, when you can't admit what's going on, when you have the mask, or when you are pretending, or there's deep heart issues, there's broken relationship that will be more broken because of that. And there's hurt and issues here that will never be fixed. You know what I mean? And so I think we're discovering that. Mm-hmm. We're discovering it ourselves. And I think we want to just have this open conversation, maybe to help others,
And I think being human, I think about having 3 kids, and we didn't have Google growing up, you and me. We did not have Google, but we have it now.
And so, like?
I mean, imagine, it's like, what did we do when we had like weird ailments? We couldn't just look it up. We had to go to the doctor,
I still don't do that though. I don't want to look on the internet. I don't want to look on the internet.
You're about to die. But for instance, one of our kids had an issue with her feet here recently. And so it's a little strange. And so I look it up. And as soon as it loads the page and you see that other people have written that same thing, or it really is like automatic relief, first of all, because someone else has experienced it. But it doesn't stop there, because what would that be if they didn't offer any solutions to the issue that was happening, right? And so I think that's kind of the heart behind this podcast is, first of all, we have gone through it. We have gone through so much in our marriage, in our lives. We have dealt with extraordinary situations and circumstances that we could not control. We have dealt with anxieties, panic attacks that we could not control, but also we've dealt with consequences of our own sin and actions and responses. Things within marriage, things within parenting, things within ministry or relationships, friendships. And I think that we have come to a place to where we are open about those things. And it is nice to know someone has gone through that, but also not to be crushed by that, because there is a solution. And what is the solution?
The gospel.
It's always a solution.
It's always the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think you bring up I think that's a great point. You said it doesn't crush you.
Yeah.
Because I think so much of masking who we are, or maybe not having like a courage at times to kind of be honest about our own stuff, is because it would be crushing.
Yeah.
If we have to bear the load of, oh my gosh, like I am like that, like I'm that selfish, or I have hurt another person that way, or offended God, or these patterns, or whatever it may be. It's like there's so many things, like, or this is my weakness. It's like those things can be crushing. But when we come back to, or when we realize, I think some of this is just God revealing it, some of it is learning. But when you come to that place of discovering that Jesus has accepted you, he has died, he paid the price, a perfect and loving God, fulfilling the law, living that perfect life every single moment, and then being perfect and without sin, he died on the cross. And then he rose from the dead, and what he offers to you, to me, to everybody who puts their faith in him is a perfect record. He says, here, take my record upon you. And that makes you accepted. That's what the Father says. Hey, you've got my son's record. Come here. You are like him. I see you as my own son, and so that, I think, keeps us from being crushed. And I think when we can't realize or don't understand the gospel, we will always run from admitting things, or we'll always run from being open, even within ourselves. You know what I mean? But it's the gospel that keeps us from being crushed, because I'm accepted, because I'm loved, and I'm forgiven, and I can face those things. It's a process. It's a hard, messy process.
Definitely. And I think that for me personally, like you talked about our first year of marriage, and I was so prideful without even knowing it. Like, I could not say I was wrong whatsoever. I could turn every conversation, every argument to where it was not my fault. And I did it automatically, You mention a lot, which I think we'll talk about at some point in one of the episodes, about being on autopilot. That was always how I had conducted myself, was I could not be wrong. Like, I had always been, like, let's say the Bible study leader or the leader of this group. And I was not the person that had issues. I was the person that always prayed for people, or the person that always helped people. And so I had just operated in a way to where I felt like I had to be perfect. And so I could not, there was no way I could admit I was wrong. But all of this stuff was happening without realizing. So fast forward to, we had been in Spain for 4 or 5 years, and we began to do a discipleship called Sonship. And I also was reading a book called Why Grace Changes Everything. And my life began to change. Here we came as missionaries, and I was still living this legalistic lifestyle. Like, I couldn't admit any wrongs. I couldn't show any weakness. If I was falling apart, I just had to deal with it. I definitely could not be open to anyone other than you, because then people would really see what's happening here. Maybe they wouldn't want us to be here. Whatever consequences that would bring, to be honest. And then I think, like you touched on, realizing that I had been already adopted as a daughter of God, and I was not adopted because of anything I had done to deserve his love.
Yeah.
But he had adopted me because of who he is. And it changed my life. And I think it has changed our marriage. I think it has changed how we parent. Just this fact. And then little by little, it goes a little deeper into who we are. And, when you realize that you are accepted, not because of what you do, not because of these good works, but just because of who God is and who we are after we're adopted children of him, it takes a weight off of you of performing. And it begins to free you. And I think that that's the process I find myself in, the process of being freed from performing. And we'll talk more in depth with that in the episodes to come.
And I think that brings me to this point, that kind of a disclaimer for every little thing that might be said going forward, is that we don't have it figured out. You know what I mean? There's certain things we've learned along the way, but we're still learning. You know what I mean? And we're still going through the process of discovering those deep caverns of our own hearts and our own tendencies, and those things that at one point were hidden to us, and so by no means in this moment or in any moment in the future can we say that we have it all figured out or this is a perfect answer, other than really what the Bible says and what the gospel says. But when it comes to us, we're still trying to figure things out and, going from one season to the next in life. And so,
yeah. So because we're so different and we come from very different backgrounds, I did not come from a family or a church that was legalistic, but it was just in my nature to pretend, to perform, to kind of act like I had it all together. But you don't have that personality, and you didn't necessarily come from that kind of background. So where does this unmasking come in for you? Is it something that's always been natural, that's always been easy for you?
I mean, I think there's still been some shocks along the way for me, as far as like, oh, I didn't think that was my issue or my struggle. That's a little shocking, but I think many times it's like things seem pretty clear to me, my own tendencies at times. And yeah, I think I realize, I'm I'm a dirty, rotten sinner, and I think I realized it and I understood it to a large degree. Um, but the unmasking has come in my identity and in the way that I relate to other people. You know what I mean? And wanting to be accepted, feeling feelings of rejection and things like that. And then even just my own behavior and things that have affected you, the way I've hurt you, just even in the recent years. I think those things have just removed this cover, and yeah, I think it'll put me on this process of discovering. But I think really it's been just that cornerstone of the gospel and Jesus, his righteousness in our account, that has kind of opened that door. You mentioned the suffering we went through. That was some hardcore things. And it was through that time that it was the work of God, the work of the Holy Spirit to just bring me back to the gospel in being crushed. And so it's been a process. The discipleships that we've gone through at church as well, the gospel-centered life, sonship for me was life-changing. Mm-hmm. The Gospel-Centered Life is a short discipleship book that we've continued to go through, and it continues to talk about performing and pretending, and idols of the heart, and acting like an orphan when we have been adopted. And so these are things that I've taken a hold of because they're true to the gospel, they're from the gospel, and I've walked with them, and I began to see, like I really am on autopilot. I really just have these continual patterns of thinking and acting that are like my functional theology to make it through life. Mm-hmm. Whether it's to make my anxiety go away or to make me feel like I'm accepted, or how I react when I feel rejected. You know what I mean? So it's been this really unexpected process that I think the gospel has put me on the path of, and so I don't know, what is that? How would you describe that or yourself?
Yeah, I think unmasking is really, first of all, starting with the ability to even look at myself, and like we talked about, being crushed by what's really going on inside of me. Okay, I see these behaviors and these tendencies in me whenever I have these certain emotions, or I feel these certain things, or when I'm around certain people, or I feel a bit challenged or competition. Why am I acting like this? And a lot of times our behaviors, that's really not what's happening. There are things that are really happening on the inside. And so I think being convinced that I am loved by God, and that seeing these things that are happening is not something where I feel hopeless but something that seeing them, the Lord revealing them to me, is something full of hope, because then he can begin to change me and, renew these thoughts, these patterns. And I think relationally, it just brings a newness, a freshness, a joy, and intimacy, because I think for many years I had this fear of, if I admitted that I actually did do that on purpose, or there was going to be less love for me, like less acceptance of me, even with you and me, And I think just it is a process, and I've not finished with it, but I want to continue, and I want to continue to unmask what's seriously going on in me in the midst of the messy. And I think that's the beautiful thing, that as humans, we feel, without even realizing it probably, that we need to clean ourselves up for God. And that is not how he works. That is not the economy he works in. Yeah. And I think we do that with each other too. We got to clean ourselves up before we show you who I am. But that's not who I am. That's like pretending, that's masking. So why don't we just unmask who we are in the midst of craziness, in the midst of messiness? And I think there will always be messy. Yeah. Always. And I think we did a discipleship, and we were in a group all over the world on Zoom, and this is the very first question they asked with a group of people that we didn't know. They were like, okay, we're going to start off, do a little icebreaker, say your name, where you're living, and the most embarrassing sin you deal with. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I had just kind of like started this journey of like grace and, being honest. And I thought, oh my gosh. And then he's like, just kidding. And so I remember we were putting together a women's event at the church. And I had asked this one girl, I'm like, okay, so I need you to get up. We're going to do a little interview. But the first question is, what's the most embarrassing sin that you... And she like kind of laughed, but she actually did it. She shared something recent, because it's easy to share stuff in the past, something very recent that was very telling. But what did it do? It made me love her even more, because I could see me in that same position making those same decisions. It's honesty brings intimacy. Yeah. But we don't stop there. We want the gospel. We want God to come and renew us and change us.
Yeah, that's where the transforming happens.
Yeah.
It's the gospel that transforms us. And I think the reason why my big desire is to have this conversation openly, to talk about the things we're going to talk about, is because so much of our lives, relationship is a part of it.
Yeah, it's true.
Friendships, church, work, family, friends. And, people that listen to this may have different convictions about the Bible, what they consider truth, whatever. But I think we're clear what the Bible says. Love God and love your neighbor. Love everybody else, and so why is it so hard? And I realized that all of these things, these issues, this hiding, it brings... Oftentimes, it ruins or breaks or puts relationships in a place of really hurting. You know what I mean? And so I think that we need to be just better at navigating relationships. And I think that comes in great part, by being able to be honest with ourselves, you know what I mean? And with others. Mm-hmm. And, from my perspective, with God. Mm-hmm. But, I love you. I love my wife, and I love my children, and I love the people God has put in my life. And I'm a jerk sometimes. And I see how my tendencies for selfishness can just ruin things, or ruin relationships, or just, there's just always the potential for me to set fire to something that's really good in my life, And so I think, there's probably people that have been in their first, second, third marriage. Yeah. And they get to the point, later in their life as, older adults, having been married 2 or 3 times, and they think, man, like the same issues that I dealt with in my first marriage, they're still here. It's like, maybe I wish I would have worked on it back then, you know, I don't know if that's the right way to look at things. It's just a thought that I had recently, but I want to work on it, man. You know what I mean?
In humility, I think, like yesterday, you and I had a difficult discussion, and I was angry, and I was hurt, and there's something in me, I think probably in most people, that we want justice, right? And I don't just want you to say, like, please forgive me, but I want you to feel a little bit of that pain that I felt.
I can feel pain.
And so I was angry, I was hurt, and all of a sudden you just start saying, you're right. You probably have been really hurt by how I've acted. And what does that humility do? It breaks down those walls. It breaks down that anger. And it's like, I'm sitting there looking at you like, I love this man and I want the best for you. And so I think what you said, like, brokenness in relationships, in marriages, between kids and parents, it's so real, isn't it? Even if we stay together, brokenness can be so real. But man, being honest, being open, being humble, and keeping that door open for God to come and work, beginning with us, it does miracles.
Mm.
And so I'm excited. I'm excited about this season. We're going to have a special guest this season. We already have planned. And we have some really interesting topics that we'll be touching on. I think we're going to have 2 episodes on anxiety.
Mm.
And it is going to be real. And so, are you ready to be open?
Yeah. I think you know I am.
What's your most embarrassing sin? Well, shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, but you know, we just want to invite, you know, 1, 2, or however many people, you know, this reaches, to pull up a seat at the table, so to speak. You know, I think that many of the things that we can share and talk about will relate, and you know, there's this thing that happens within a person when there's shame, or when there's fear, or when there's suffering, or something's happening in your life. It's isolating. And it tends to just push you away from people. You know, if you're a Christian, even from God, you kind of feel like you're just isolated from God. You isolate yourself. You feel like that you're alone. And so we want to invite you to at least that to know that you're not alone. You know, to know that people are suffering, that people are going through the challenges of life. And we can talk about them. We can be open about them. And so, yeah, just want to invite you guys to come along on this journey and pull up a seat at the table.
Drink a cup of coffee. We'll be being real around here, yeah?
Cheers to that.
Well, episode 1, Unmasked and Messy, done.
That's a wrap.
Out.
See you next time.